Morning, everyone. I hope I'm audible. Now, in our previous lecture, we had talked about the religious sources of ancient Indian history, and towards the end, we had discussed about two specific types of Smriti literature, that is Puran literature and Itihas literature. याद है ना पुराण लिटरेचर क्या है? It is a new type of devotional literature which emerged from the post-Mauryan period onwards up to the Gupta period. It consists of genealogies of gods and goddesses and conflates the dynastic histories of contemporary dynasties with those genealogical records, with those divine genealogies. Itihas tradition, on the other hand, refers to the two great epics of India, that is the Mahabharata and Ramayana. Now, it is the combination of these two types of literature is considered to be the ancient Indian historical tradition, that is the Itihas Puran tradition. Right? That is what we need to talk about now. The Itihas Puran tradition है क्या, and what are its important features and how did it originate? Take down a question. Question answer की फॉर्म में इसको देखेंगे. What is the Itihas Puran tradition of Indian history? Question mark. How did it originate and what are its features? Question mark. 200 words. 15 minutes. ठीक है, तो क्वेश्चन के तीन पोर्शंस हैं. फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल, व्हाट इज द इतिहास पुराण ट्रेडिशन, हाउ डिड इट ओरिजिनेट, origins, and what are its features. These are the things that we need to address. You can begin by writing the Itihas Puran tradition of Indian history is the early historical tradition of India. Full stop. It is comprised of the two major epics, that is Mahabharata and Ramayana, and the Purans. It emerged in the post-Mauryan period and flourished in the early Christian centuries. When we say early Christian centuries, we mean 1st to 5th century AD. Okay? It emerged in the post-Mauryan period and flourished in the early Christian centuries. नेक्स्ट सब हेडिंग दो, origin. Its origin may be attributed to the following factors. The following factors. एक एक करके लिख सकते हैं. The point. First of all, there already existed an oral tradition in the Indian civilization of passing on knowledge and legends. Okay? So it was a continuation of that oral tradition. So Vedic literature, for example, had been transmitted for thousands of years through this oral tradition, right? And once Vedic literature was compiled, new legends were inserted into it. They finally matured in the form of the Itihas-Purana. Write down. It was a continuation. It was a continuation. It was a continuation of the oral tradition that already existed in India. Hello, Nores. I'm sorry, we had to begin the class a little late today because of some technical issues. I hope I'm audible though. आवाज आ रही है ना? Good morning. Right. So I hope you haven't missed anything. अगर कुछ मिस हो गया ना तो please wait till the end of the class. I'll be sending you a snapshot of whatever I have been. If you have any doubts, you can ask me. All right. हाँ, तो कहाँ पे थे जी हम? That already existed in India. Full stop. The stories, legends, and genealogies passed down through this oral tradition. Were written down in the form of these epics and Purans. ठीक है, सेकंड लिखो. The Itihas-Purana literature also serves as a repository of cultural memory. देखो डिस्टिंक्शन क्या है. जो ओरल ट्रेडिशन है, दिस रिफर्स टू द Vedic literature and royal genealogies. By nature, is this oral tradition a popular tradition or an elite tradition? Elite tradition maintained by the priestly class and the ruling class. On the other hand, there exist the people's own legends and myths. They have their own gods and goddesses and their own figures that they revere through the history, through the past, right? So, a cultural memory bhi is elite tradition. This popular tradition also blended with this elite tradition and found its reflection in the Itihas-Purana tradition. क्या लिखा है? The Itihas Puran literature served as the repository of cultural memory. That is, the popular legends, folklores, and myths of the common people. Popular legends, folklores, and myths of the common people, blended with the elite oral tradition. Blended with the elite oral tradition of the common people, blended with the elite oral tradition. Okay? So, first was oral tradition, second was cultural memory. Number 3, right? The Itihas-Puran tradition emerged through the integration of mythology and history. Integration of mythology and history. Okay? So, in fact, this literature has been written in such a manner that it is often almost impossible to distinguish which facts are historical, which facts are mythical. कौन से असली में हुए, कौन से असली में नहीं हुए. ठीक है? Write down. It presents historical events, narratives, and figures within a mythological framework. And why is it done like this? Why not pure history? Because purpose of this literature was not history writing, it was to impart certain values, give some teachings to the people who were receiving this or जो इसका target audience था. ठीक है? Write down. This blending of myth and history, helped convey moral, religious, and philosophical teachings. Moral, religious, and philosophical teachings to the people. Next, लिखो. Right. So, these different epics and Purans, do they have a single author? No. So, although the Ramayana is attributed to Valmiki and the other Purans and epics are also attributed to different individuals. However, reality में देखने के लिए क्या मिलता है? That they were never the works of a single author. Rather, they have continued to evolve over time. So, for a very long period of time, these documents, these texts were living documents. नए generation of scholars आएंगे, उसमें कुछ add करेंगे. They are going to add their own narratives to it. their own mythologies, their own histories, their own stories to it, with their own worldview, with their own values being reflected in these new editions. At the same time, the next generation of scholars would also redact some of the earlier writings. तो उसमें से पहले वाली writings में से कुछ निकाल भी लिया जाएगा, right? So these works have been shaped through a constant process of authorship and redaction, right? And this has also led to the origin of many new legends and myths within the Itihas-Purana tradition. जो हमको अभी इतिहास पुराण ट्रेडिशन में रिफ्लेक्ट होता दिखता है, that is the result of several stages of evolution, right? So this is also how the Itihas Puran tradition. Write down. Itihas Puran literature underwent several stages of authorship and redaction. Authorship and redaction. Full stop. Over time, comma, their content was reorganized along with numerous phases of addition and removal. Along with several phases of addition and removal. Okay? So this was the way in which Itihas Puran tradition was shaped. क्या है? Oral tradition का continuation था. It was the continuation of preservation of cultural memory in a written form. Thus, it was a blending of the elite and common popular traditions of Indian historical sensibility. It also represents the integration of mythology, both elite as well as common, and history, primarily elite history. The Itihas Puran tradition also emerged as the result of a long process of authorship and redaction. Okay? Next subheading though. Teachers. Write down. The Itihas Puran tradition is characterized by the following distinctive features. Number one, genealogies. लिखो. An important aspect of this literature is focus on Vansha and Vanshanu Charita. Vansha and Vanshanu Charita. Right? कल हमने डिस्कस किया था इसको. You remember this? क्या था ये? Vansha was the genealogy of gods and sages. ठीक है? Vanshanucharita is the dynastic records of kings. And are the two of them connected or unconnected? They are connected. Okay? So, therefore, would it be correct to say that the Itihas-Purana literature is a kind of political literature or not? ऐसा बोलना सही होगा या नहीं होगा? सही होगा. Why? What is the political function that these genealogies are serving? In the eyes of the people, they are legitimizing the rule of their kings by claiming that these kings are descended from great gods, heroes, and sages, and thus they have the divine right to rule. ठीक है, क्या लिखा है आपने अभी? हाँ, वंशा एंड वंशानुचरिता. Full stop. These two are often conflated to grant legitimacy to the ruling class and reinforce the idea of divine rights of kings. Divine rights of kings. Divine rights of kings. Stop. Thus, this tradition falls into the category of political literature. ठीक है? Next, number 2. Is the Itihas-Purana literature purely historical or purely mythological literature? No, it is a blending of the two. These are mythico-historical accounts. Right? And what is the purpose that these mythico-historical accounts served? Key purposes, sorry. First of all, they framed or they gave a cosmological context to contemporary and past history. Okay? So they framed Indian history within the cosmological or mythological context. ऐसा करने से होता क्या है? इनका जो वर्जन है पास्ट का, उसका अथॉरिटी इंक्रीज होगा या नहीं होगा? बिकॉज इट हैज रिलीजियस sanction, not has mythological sanction. Secondly, these mythologies are often framed in the form of a battle between good and evil. अब इस battle को depict करने के लिए what is going to be required? To define what is good and to define what is evil, right? And these definitions are supposed to serve as instruction manuals to the common people. कि अगर ऐसा नहीं करोगे तो जो इन मैथोलॉजीज में इविल के साथ हुआ है वैसा आपके साथ ही होगा. यू वांट टू बी ऑन द साइड ऑफ गुड एंड रेजिस्ट इविल, राइट? सो दे also these mythical historical accounts also served as moral and ethical guidelines to regulate social behavior, right? Social behavior, right? Uh, Within this literature, you will find that different figures are treated with the different levels of respect. For example, highest respect is going to be reserved for gods and goddesses. उसके बाद नंबर किसका आएगा? Sages का या kings का? Sages, then kings, then their priests and other ministers. While the common people, what are they expected to be? They're expected to remain obedient, right? So एक तरह से जो सोशल एंड पॉलिटिकल हायरार्की सोसाइटी में एस्टैब्लिश्ड था उसको प्रोटेक्ट करने के लिए भी इस तरह के मिथिकल हिस्टोरिकल अकाउंट्स लिखे गए एंड दे रीइंफोर्स दैट सोशल ऑर्डर. दे bolstered the socio-political and economic order existing in society. ठीक है? Further, at the time when this literature was written, a very important process was going on in. क्या हो रहा था? Expansion of civil society. इंडिया में कई सारे इंपीरियल सेंटर्स थे. फॉर एग्जाम्पल मथुरा अंडर द कुशान्स और पेशावर, लेटर पाटलिपुत्र अंडर द गुप्तास और उज्जैन. एंड यहाँ से these imperial powers were trying to expand their. Now, as they expanded their influence, more and more territory came under their control. And because by this point of time, population and trade had reached critical levels, therefore, they were these powers were no longer satisfied by establishing their control over the already populated areas or already urbanized places. Rather, they began venturing into the wilderness. They began clearing forests and they began to resettle these cleared forests with agricultural people. Right? A forest को clear किया, they came into contact with new people which till now had remained isolated. कौन थे ये groups? The tribals, right? Now the tribals till now had their own distinct languages and cultures. They had their own religions, their own gods and goddesses. Now these tribal polities or tribal societies that they had to be integrated into the mainstream society. They had to be convinced to give up their primitive forms of life, their shifting agriculture, hunting and gathering activities, and start practicing settled agriculture. They were also to be convinced to regularly pay revenue. वो कैसे किया जाए? By integrating the tribal culture with the mainstream culture. The best way to do that is to give the status of major gods to the tribal gods. How to do that? Through the tool of incarnation or अवतारवाद, राइट? तो ट्राइबल गॉड्स को दर्जा दे दिया जाएगा मेजर गॉड्स का, जो वैदिक गॉड, एग्जाम्पल विष्णु और शिवा से. एंड with this they are going to be brought not only into the economic mainstream but also into the social mainstream. And what was the structure of the social mainstream? Was it flat or was it hierarchical? Hierarchical tha. And within this social mainstream, the newly inducted tribals, the new agrarian communities, are they going to be given very high status? No, relatively lower status. उनमें जो elites हैं उनको तो higher status दे दिया जाएगा, but the bulk of the newly inducted people, they are going to be given lower status, so that the idea of political, economic and social subservience can be integrated into their consciousness. And how to do that? Through this literature, through these mythico-historical accounts. Okay. So next, write down. They served as an important tool to integrate new people and communities into the expanding socio-economic mainstream. Into the expanding socio-economic mainstream. ठीक है? So दो features देखे हैं. First of all, they were kind of political literature because of the importance of genealogy, but they were mythico-historical accounts which served several purposes. Third लिखो. इतिहास पुराण literature represents a living tradition. लिविंग ट्रेडिशन मतलब क्या हुआ? दैट इट नेवर स्टैग्नेटेड. उसमें जो ऑथरशिप एंड रिडक्शन का प्रोसेस है, दैट कंटिन्यू टू गो ऑन as these legends, as these traditions reached new people and new regions, right? तो यहाँ पे क्या हुआ? They came up with their own versions of the Mahabharata and Ramayana. They came up with new Purans, right? That is why there is no single Puran. 18 अलग अलग महापुराण है. रामायण और महाभारत के भी अलग अलग recensions हैं. तो these recensions spread from North India to East India. वहाँ पे भी अलग recension है. वेस्ट इंडिया में भी अलग मॉडिफिकेशंस है. आपको उड़ीसा के रीजन में अलग लेजेंड्स मिल जाएंगे. डीप साउथ में और अलग लेजेंड्स. श्रीलंका में बिल्कुल completely different रामायण you will find. Then Southeast Asia में Thailand has its own version of the रामायण. Myanmar has its own version of the रामायण. इंडोनेशिया में अपना खुद का अलग रामायण मिल जाता है. These represent a living tradition. Right down. Over time, multiple versions and recensions of the great epics and Purans have emerged. Over time, multiple versions and recensions of the great epics and Purans have emerged. Full stop. As these literature, or as these texts traveled to new regions, they were modified in accordance with emerging priorities and challenges, resulting in emerging opportunities and challenges, or emerging priorities and challenges, resulting in the creation of a rich tapestry within these traditions. ये हो गए the features of the इतिहास पुराण. कंक्लूजन क्या लिख सकते हैं? बताइए, how can we conclude this answer? The इतिहास पुराण tradition presents a window into the ancient Indian sense of history, which was completely distinct from the Western sensibilities. They represent the synthesis of divergent intellectual pursuits into a common, or into a harmonious tradition they represent the synthesis of divergent intellectual pursuits into a harmonious tradition, which reflects the brilliance of the ancient Indian mind. And you can write, most significantly, comma, this tradition continues to shape modern Indian consciousness even 2000 years after its ठीक है नेचुरल टेंडेंसी इंडियंस का क्या होता है to neatly categorize actions into ethical choices, good or bad, and to perceive important decisions in the shape of a conflict between good and evil. ये sensibility कहाँ से आता है? From the Itihas Puran tradition. Then the figures and legends associated with these accounts, such as the different gods and goddesses, their deeds, the places mentioned, they continue to feature very heavily in the Indian consciousness. They are never at the back of the Indian mind, they're always at the front of the Indian consciousness. And because these accounts have blended themselves so deeply into the religious consciousness which permeates the present Hindu society, that is why it is almost impossible to separate modern Hinduism from the Itihas Puran tradition. Okay? Then the way in which Indians think, for example, Indians love their heroes, and hero worship is almost like another aspect of the Indian religion. For example, क्रिकेट में भी लोगों को अपने भगवान बना लेते हैं लोग, देखा होगा आपने. क्यों होता है? बाकी कल्चर्स में क्यों नहीं होता है? Because hero worship has been baked into the Indian consciousness very deeply through these traditions, right? इसके साथ कुछ प्रॉब्लम्स भी एसोसिएटेड हैं. फॉर एग्जांपल, they reinforce the caste and gender stereotypes which continue to plague the Indian society, and efforts which have been going on for the better part of 200 years now, ever since the mid 19th century, जब सोशल रिलीजियस रिफॉर्मर्स ने ये जो इविल्स ऑफ द सोसाइटी इनको एड्रेस करने की कोशिश करी थी पहली बार, तब से लेकर अभी तक एफर्ट्स चल रहे हैं. But this is an almost unending process, right? Why is that? Because of the negative caste and gender stereotypes created by the Itihas Puran tradition. इतना सब कुछ डिटेल में नहीं लिखने की जरूरत है. You can simply write, they have continued to shape the modern Indian consciousness even 200 years after its emergence. हाँ, अगर क्वेश्चन कुछ और होता, that examine the current relevance of the Itihas Puran tradition of Indian history writing, then you would have written through all these examples. How the Itihas Puran tradition continues to feature very heavily in the Indian consciousness. ठीक है, ये हो गया इतिहास पुराण tradition. क्लियर है ये? राइट. तो हिंदूज का रिलीजियस लिटरेचर वी हैव कवर्ड. और कौन सा रिलीजियस लिटरेचर है? बुद्धिस्ट लिटरेचर एंड जैन लिटरेचर. बुद्धिस्ट लिटरेचर प्राइमरीली किस लैंग्वेज में? अर्लियर लिटरेचर पाली में, लेटर संस्कृत एंड सिंहलीज. ठीक है. बुद्धिस्ट लिटरेचर की जब बात आती है तो सबसे पहला तो लिटरेचर होता है कैनोनिकल लिटरेचर. दैट मीन्स द फाउंडेशनल लिटरेचर ऑफ एनी रिलीजन, दैट इज नोन एज इट्स कैनन. ये NNON वाला नहीं, कैनन तो वाला नहीं, CANON कैनन. ठीक है. तो द कैनोनिकल लिटरेचर ऑफ बुद्धिज्म consists of the Tripitaka, that is the three holy baskets. कौन कौन से पिटाकास? सुत्त पिटाका, विनय पिटाक एंड अभिधम्म पिटाक. राइट. सुत्त पिटाका क्या है? consists of the teachings of the Buddha. Vinay Pitaka consists of the rules of the Sangha. And Abhidhamma Pitaka is a compilation of the philosophical explanations given by Buddha and the later Buddhist scholars. So it covers the metaphysics of Buddhism. Sutta Pitaka, Vinay Pitaka, and Abhidhamma Pitaka. Clear? The earliest type of Buddhist literature was the canonical literature. After this, Buddhism also underwent some changes. एक नया sect emerge हुआ within Buddhism, which became the dominant sect, that is Mahayana Buddhism. What was the difference between Yin and Mahayana Buddhism? Yin Buddhism emphasized upon the importance of individual efforts to attain salvation, whereas Mahayana Buddhism emphasized upon the importance of collective efforts, right? Yin Buddhism में following the eightfold path was sufficient to attain salvation. Mahayana Buddhism emphasized upon devotionalism in order to attain salvation, in order to attain nirvana. So the idea was that the grace of the Buddha can be obtained by expressing devotion towards him. So new practices such as the construction of temples or idol worship or chanting of Buddhist mantras, all this started under Mahayana. इसके पीछे जो factors है, we are going to discuss in greater detail when we are talking about the Mahajanpada period. But अभी के लिए इतना clear हो गया difference क्या है Yin Buddhism and Mahayana Buddhism में. And Mahayana Buddhism, which was devotional in literature, resulted in the emergence of a new category of literature that was also devotional. तो इसको आप कंसिडर कर सकते हो एज द पैरेलल ऑफ पुराण लिटरेचर. से विद इन हिंदुइज्म पुराण लिटरेचर इमर्ज होना शुरू हुआ, वैसे ही विद इन बुद्धिज्म एक नया टाइप ऑफ लिटरेचर, दिस वाज नोन एज अवदान लिटरेचर. क्या था ये? A new form of devotional literature. New form of devotional literature associated with Mahayana Buddhism emerged. With Mahayana Buddhism emerged from the emerged from the 3rd century BCE. 3rd century BCE. Now, some important examples of Afghan literature. Tok Afghan and Divya Afghan. ठीक है. Then Mahayana Buddhism में एक और नया चेंज इमर्ज हुआ, that unlike the original Buddhism in which Buddha was considered only as a great teacher, under Mahayana Buddhism he was considered to be an incarnation of God himself. He was supposed to be the supreme God. तो अब उनको deify करने के लिए some new kind of literature is going to be written in the form of biographies. तो जो रिलीजियस पर्सनालिटीज की बायोग्राफी होती है उनको एक अलग टर्म से बोला जाता है, दे आर नोन एज हेगियोग्राफी. ठीक है. And during the post-modern period, two important Sanskrit hagiographies are going to be written. Post-modern and Gupta period. One of them was the Lalit Vistar, and the other was the Buddha Charita. Then finally we have some philosophical treatises. Such as the Milind Panho, written by Nagasena, and two Sri Lankan Sinhalese Buddhist philosophical works, that is the Deepavansha and the Mahavansha. Deepavansha and Mahavansha. कैनोनिकल टेक्स्ट्स हैं, ये किस लैंग्वेज में थे? पाली. With the emergence of Mahayana Buddhism, the importance of Pali declined and Pali was replaced by Sanskrit. ये जो अशोक अवदान, दिव्य अवदान, ललित विस्तार, बुद्ध चरिता है, सब संस्कृत में. मिलिंद पन्हो also in Sanskrit. Deepavansha and Mahavansha in Sinhalese. Then we have Jain literature also. The canonical text of the Jains, originally compiled in the 2nd century BC, was known as the Purvas. In Prakrit, it belonged to which sect of the Jains? Digambars or Shvetambars? Shvetambars. However, in a fire in Patliputra, all of this is said to have been lost. So these works no longer exist. Following this, in the 5th century AD, almost 700 years later, another attempt was made to recompile the canon of Jainism. And the Shvetambars once again compiled a new set of works known as the Angas. There are a total of 12 Angas. Also in Prakrit, and it is also attributed to the Shvetambars. Following this, a number of commentaries were written on these Angas known as the Upangas. Also in Prakrit. However, later on, Jainism came to be closely associated or came to closely resemble the Brahmanical religion, and the decline of Prakrit meant the emergence of Sanskrit literature within Jainism. And अब एक नया type of literature emerge होगा within Jainism, that is hagiographies. किसकी hagiographies लिखी जाएंगी? Vardhaman Mahavir along with the other Tirthankras or other great Jain teachers. So these hagiographies, some important ones include Parishisht Parvan, written in 12th century written in the 8th century by a scholar named Hemchandra. the Obai Sutra and the भगवती सूत्र. ठीक है, ये हो गया इंडिया का रिलीजियस लिटरेचर. ठीक है, हिंदुइज्म. देन वी हैव सेक्युलर लिटरेचर आल्सो. किस किस तरह का लिटरेचर है? पॉलिटिकल ट्रीटाइजेस और वर्क्स ऑन statecraft, administration, economic organization, etc. Right? Two most famous examples from ancient Indian history: the Arthashastra written by Kautilya and the Niti Sar written by Mandaka. Right? Then we have a large number of cultural works, works which talk about the arts, such as the Kama Sutra of Vatsyayan, which covers a total of 64 different arts and crafts, and Nati Shastra attributed to Bharat Muni, which is a treatise on the art forms of music, dance, and theatre. Then we have a number of literary works, such as the works of Bhash, Shudrak, Kalidas, Rakadat, etc. Right? Right? Some of their important works: Bhashka, Daridra Charudattam, Shudrak का Vrich Katikam, कालिदास के वर्क्स मालविकाग्निमित्रम, विज्ञान शकुंतलम, विक्रम और वश्यम, रघुवंशम, कुमार संभव, ऋतु संहार एंड मेघदूतम। ये सारे क्या हैं? ड्रामास। Raghuvansham and Kumar Sambhavas are long poetic works, epics. Ritu Samhar and Meghdutam are poetic collections, poems. ठीक है? Clear? Then we have विशाखा दत्त। क्या लिखा है इसने? मुद्र राक्षसा एंड देवी चंद्रगुप्तम। These are also dramas. विष्णु शर्मा, इन्होंने क्या कंपाइल किया? पंचतंत्र is a collection of short stories. क्लियर है ना? देन ये हो गए लिटरेरी वर्क्स, कुछ इंपॉर्टेंट लिटरेरी वर्क्स एंशिएंट इंडिया के। वी हैव सम साइंटिफिक लिटरेचर, such as the आर्यभट्टियम। किसका? आर्यभट्ट। बृहत संहिता एंड पंच सिद्धांतिका ऑफ Mihiर। We have the ब्रह्मस्फूत सिद्धांत ऑफ ब्रह्मगुप्ता, etc. Right? You also have some other manuals such as the Charak Samhita of Charak. It is a treatise on medicine. The Sushrut Samhita of Sushrut. It is a treatise on सर्जरी। आर्यभट्ट ने किन सब्जेक्ट्स के बारे में लिखा? एस्ट्रोनॉमी एंड मैथमेटिक्स। The Brihat Samhita deals with astronomy and astrology. Panch Siddhantika, astronomy and मैथमेटिक्स, ब्रह्मसूत्र सिद्धांत, मैथमेटिक्स, चरक संहिता, मेडिसिन, सुश्रुत संहिता, सर्जरी। ठीक है, तो ये हो गए कुछ secular literatures. Then you also have some secular literature of a political nature, such as royal biographies, example, the Harshcharita, written by Bana Bhatt, covers the life and deeds of Harshvardhan, the ruler of the Pushyabhuti dynasty, who ruled in the early 7th century from Kannauj. Then we have the Gaduvaho, written by Vakpati or Vakpati Raj. It is dedicated to North Indian ruler Yashovarman, belonging to the 8th century. Then we have the Vikramandev Vijay, written by Kashmiri poet Bilhana. Covers the deeds and victories of the Chalukyan ruler Vikramaditya the sixth. इसी तरह से there are several other royal biographies as well. Right? Now, एक तो ये हमने सर्वे कर लिया है इंडियन लिटरेचर का. Next question emerges is the critical evaluation of literature as a historical source. So tell me, कैसे critically evaluate कर सकते हैं literature को as a source of this? By addressing its shortcomings and strengths. Can you pinpoint some shortcomings? Exaggerations कई सारे होते हैं. We have seen religious literature में या फिर इतिहास पुराण ट्रेडिशन में there's a blending of myth and reality, so it is almost impossible to distinguish the two. Language used is poetic and figurative in nature, तो इसमें से fact को निकालना थोड़ा मुश्किल हो जाता है. What else? They are written in ancient languages और इनको interpret भी करना होता है, right? एंड इंटरप्रेट करने में जो इंटरप्रेटर है या फिर स्कॉलर, मॉडर्न स्कॉलर है, वो अपने बायसेस इसमें इंसर्ट कर सकता है. देन authorship of most of the Indian literature is suspect. They cannot be neatly attributed to a single author. Even works such as the Nitisar and Arthashastra, they are considered to be works that have been prepared over several centuries. So even एक ही author के works नहीं, right? And in such a scenario, when we are unable to identify the actual author, तो होता क्या है? We are not able to pinpoint the biases of that author. the objectives of that author behind writing his work, the person that he was writing for. तो patronage हमको नहीं पता लग पाता है, right? Then we are also going to have a number of biases in writing. So everybody writes history with a purpose, and sometimes that bias is implicit, sometimes that bias is explicit also. Implicit bias किस तरह का है, explicit bias किस तरह का? For example, if हर्षवर्धन की biography बाणभट्ट लिख रहा है, is he also going to talk about the failures of हर्षवर्धन? No, only about the great achievements. ये तो explicit bias से दिख जाता है हमको. That patronage क्योंकि हर्षवर्धन से मिल रहा था, that is why he only praised हर्षवर्धन. But implicit bias थोड़ा ज्यादा dangerous होता है, हमको पता नहीं लगता है. So we may be unaware, or it may be unclear to us that why a particular author has a particular attitude towards certain groups. So he may be biased in favor of certain groups or biased against certain groups. Right? तो वो भी हमको देखने के लिए मिलता है. और क्या प्रॉब्लम्स हो सकती हैं? लिटरेचर इज ससेप्टेबल टू एडिशंस एंड रिडक्शंस. इसमें कोई भी कुछ ऐड कर सकता है, कोई भी कुछ वहां से निकाल सकता है, एंड इट इज वेरी डिफिकल्ट टू सी कि क्या पहले ऐड हुआ था, क्या ओरिजिनल था, क्या बाद में ऐड हुआ है. व्हाट एल्स? Literary evidence cannot always be supported by archaeology. For example, based on the reading of the Mahabharata, a very famous Indian historian V.V. Lal excavated the site of Hastinapur. लेकिन जिस तरह का डिस्क्रिप्शन महाभारत में था, वैसा डिस्कवरी, वैसा कॉरेस्पॉन्डिंग डिस्कवरी हस्तिनापुर में नहीं. एंड दिस raises the suspicion of historians with regards to the veracity of the entire source as a whole. So it is not always possible to verify the accuracy of these literary sources through archaeological records. What else? और क्या शॉर्टकमिंग हो सकता है इसके अलावा लिटरेरी सोर्सेस के? देखो, focus of Indian writing has never been towards the accurate depiction of historical events. In fact, historicity always takes a backseat when it comes to other priorities, such as moral education or political integration or legitimacy. Okay? So, in order to do those things, it is believed that historicity has often been twisted, it has often been molded to fit the other political or mythological narratives. क्योंकि प्रायोरिटी historical accuracy पर नहीं है, it is about over moral education or political integration. That is why history is often distorted in these narratives. Please very quickly write down shortcomings. Number one, most Indian works are not works of pure history. They are mythico-historical accounts. They are mythico-historical accounts where historical accuracy is of lesser priority. Of lesser priority. Accuracy, mythico-historical accounts in which historical accuracy is of lesser priority. Second, the authorship of most Indian works is suspect. Making it difficult to identify the implicit and explicit bias of these writings. Implicit and explicit bias of these writings. ठीक है? Number 3. Literary works are susceptible to interpolations and actions. Okay, thus they are easy to manipulate. Number 4. Biased authorship is another big problem. Right? They are susceptible to problems with translation and interpretations. Next. Literary references do not always match the archaeological record. Do not always match the archaeological record. Okay? These are the shortcomings. But literary sources have their own strengths also. किस तरह के strengths? क्या? They offer detailed information in an organized framework from which it is easier to glean historical information. Glean historical information. They also present a window into the minds of their ancient Indian authors and their patrons. Okay? This is something that archaeology can never have. Further, literature also helps paint vivid picture of ancient Indian culture and sensibilities. ठीक है? Next, it can add color to archaeological discoveries. It provides a glimpse of royal ideology and societal values. And linguistic and phonetic analysis of literary works can give a glimpse into the process of evolution and diffusion of languages. ठीक है? Similarly, the diffusion of myths and legends can help the diffusion of myths and legends can help recreate the pattern of human migration, political expansion, and cultural and commercial contacts. समझ में आया ये? क्या मतलब हुआ इसका? That as, for example, as the stories of the Ramayana traveled from North India to Central India to South India, you can also see how interconnection between these regions and the communities between them, living in them, were emerging. This took place through various processes. कुछ इलाकों में पॉलिटिकल एक्सपेंशन की वजह से ये नए नैरेटिव्स इमर्ज हुए, कुछ जगहों पर ट्रेडिंग कम्युनिटीज के मूवमेंट से, गुड्स के एक्सचेंज से, स्टोरीज के डिफ्यूजन से ये डेवलपमेंट हुआ. और बियॉन्ड इंडिया आल्सो सिमिलर प्रोसेसेस. ठीक है? सो दीज ये पैटर्न जो है ये हमको लिटरेचर के एनालिसिस से बहुत क्लियरली दिख सकते हैं. दीज आर सम ऑफ द ट्रेंड्स. Now, in light of these strengths and weaknesses, क्या मेथड यूज करना चाहिए मॉडर्न हिस्टोरियंस को while using these ancient Indian sources to recreate Indian history? Write down. Conclusion. Historians must be careful to account for the weaknesses of literary sources. Be careful to account for the weaknesses of the literary sources. These must be evaluated critically and should not be taken at face value. जो लिखा हुआ है उसको आंख बंद करके सच मानने की जरूरत नहीं है. It must be tested critically. Its validity must be ascertained. And how to ascertain its validity? By comparing and contrasting it against other sources, both literary and of archaeological nature. They must be tested against other literary and archaeological works. Secondly, historians must also account for not only the bias of the authors, but also their own bias. ठीक है, खुद का जो इनहेरेंट बायस है और ऑथर का जो इनहेरेंट एंड एक्सप्लिसिट बायस है उसको भी अकाउंट करके दे नीड टू बी these sources need to be interpreted. Write down. Only with this care and attention, can literature emerge as a truly useful source of history. ठीक है, ये हो गया critical evaluation of literary source. Now, Indian literary sources we have covered. बचे क्या है? Foreign literary sources. Ancient India attracted a large number of foreign travelers who have left behind their own written records of their travel accounts, their own travelogues. They can broadly be divided into 3 categories. कौन? Greco-Roman travelers, the Chinese travelers, and the Arab. First of all, the Greco-Roman travelers. So when did a direct contact between India and Europe emerge? Which political event opened the route between India and Europe? The invasion of Alexander towards the second half of the 4th century BC. 326 to 324 BC was the period of his invasion of the northwestern portion of the Indian subcontinent. Following this, a large number of Greek travelers and other Roman travelers later on continued to visit India. The contact between India and the West reached its peak during the post-Mauryan period because of the flourishing Indo-Roman trade along the maritime as well as overland Silk Route, which connected not only Rome and India but also India to China and India to North Africa and the Eastern Mediterranean. जहाँ पे आजकल पैलेस्टाइन गाजा वगैरह लड़ाई चल रही है ना, उस रीजन से भी ट्रेड होता था. ठीक है. नाउ Alexander came to India along with some warrior scholars, and those who have covered his famous battles in India and also have recorded the details of the northwestern portion of India, including the Indus Valley and the Makran coast. They include Anacicrates, and Aristobulus, along with his famous admiral Nearchus. Nearchus को अलेक्जेंडर ने टास्क दिया था to take his ships along the Indus River and explore right up to the mouth of the Indus. Nearchus went even beyond this, exploring the Indian coastline up to the Konkan. ठीक है, तो महाराष्ट्र. Now, they were the companions of Alexander. Clear? Then, what happened after Alexander's invasion? Although he was victorious in the Battle of the Hydaspes, his soldiers forced him to turn back, and then he started returning towards Macedonia via Persia. He died, however, en route at Babylon. Right? His empire was divided among his generals. उनको डायोडोकाई बोलते थे. उनके बीच में उसका empire split हो गया. The easternmost part of the empire came under the rule of one of his generals known as Seleucus Nicator. Seleucus Nicator ने एक नए kingdom का foundation किया known as Bactria. ठीक है. Now, Bactria was a neighbor of the ancient Indian Mauryan Empire. By the time that Seleucus Nicator established Bactria, Chandragupta Maurya had laid the foundations of the Mauryan Empire as well. Okay, दोनों processes almost simultaneously. And the region of Punjab became an area of contest between these two new emerging powers. War हुआ, the Mauryans emerged victorious, but they did not punish the Greeks too harshly. Treaty relations were established, resulting in the exchange of ambassadors. Who was the ambassador of Seleucus Nicator at the court of Chandragupta Maurya? Megasthenes. कुछ लिखा है उसने क्या? इंडिका. ठीक है. So Megasthenes is probably the most well-known Greek scholar to have written about India. He wrote the Indica. He was the ambassador of Seleucus Nicator, the ruler of Bactria at the court of Chandragupta Maurya at Pataliputra. Clear? However, जो original work है Indica, that is no longer available to us. It has been lost in time. And we know about what Megasthenes wrote through the writings of some later Greek and Roman scholars. So, the writings of Megasthenes exist or present today in the form of excerpts. So, quotations that were taken by these scholars from Megasthenes' work about. कौन है ये scholars? Arayan, Plutarch, Justin, Diodorus, Pliny the Elder, and Strabo. So the writings of Nagasthenes survive the form of excerpts of the writings of these scholars. Okay. Then there was another very famous work which covers Indo-Roman. This work is by an anonymous author and it is known as the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea. Erythraean Sea was the old Greek name for the Red Sea. It has been found from, I think it was near Muscat, the Red Sea में located है. So, sorry, near the ये Gulf of Aden, ठीक है? कि Erythraean Sea में Red Sea में located है. And from here, this work was found and is thus known as the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea. It contains details of India's overseas trade, not only with the Western world but also with the East. It focuses upon seaborne trade, mentions a large number of Indian ports, also gives a list of the important ports along the Indian Ocean region that were important for this trade and the commodities that were being exchanged. ठीक है, तो इस तरह के ग्रेको रोमन वर्क से हमको इंडिया के बारे में कुछ इंपॉर्टेंट इंफॉर्मेशन. क्लियर? नेक्स्ट वी हैव दी Chinese travelers. Why did the bulk of Chinese travelers come to India? What was their interest? Buddhism, religious purpose के लिए. They had come either for pilgrimage or to collect holy Buddhist scrolls or to learn at the great Indian universities such as Nalanda. Three famous Chinese scholars which visited India during the ancient period: Fahin, Huensang, also known as Yuanchang, and Yixing, also known as Yijin. When did Fahin arrive in India? 399 AD. When did he leave? 412. Stayed in India for a total of 13 years. Who was the ruler of North India at that point of time? Chandragupta II, Ramadit. Huensang visited India during the reign of which great North Indian emperor? Harshvardhan or Singh during the 7th century. Okay? So these were some of the Chinese travelers. They have written their own travelogues. Okay? Now, while Fahin has talked about Indian society, economy, and the social divisions in general, he has not talked about Indian polity. On the other hand, Huensang has talked about primarily Indian religion and polity. He has given a great degree of praise to Harshvardhan, whereas Fahin does not mention any Indian ruler. ठीक है, तो इस तरह के difference. Then we have the Arab travelers, such as Al-Suleiman, Ibn Khurdab, Al-Masudi, and Al-Biruni. These three came between or came during the 9th or 10th centuries. Okay. What was the context of their arrival in India? Did they come to India with invaders or as traders? Came to India as traders. 8th to 10th century is known as the period of the tripartite struggle in India. During this period, the region of Sindh was already under Arab control, and Sindh provided a gateway for the Arabs to trade with the three great powers of India. कौन से? गुर्जर प्रतिहारास, राष्ट्रकूटास and Palas. ठीक है? So Gurjar Pratiharas in Western India, Rashtrakutas in Southern India, and Palas in Eastern India, Bihar and Bengal Valley region. What was the nature of the relationship between these three great Indian powers? Constant warfare, and warfare by this point of time had undergone major transformations. The importance of elephants had declined and the importance of war horses had increased. Problem क्या था? India did not have any native robust species of war horses. Therefore, horses had to be imported. कहाँ से import कर रहे थे? अरेबिया से, खुरासान से, पर्जिया से, और even यूरोप से. Therefore, all these powers were reliant upon the Arab travelers, क्योंकि यही लोग conduct करते थे. It is in this context that these early three scholars or travelers came to India. किसके बारे में लिखा है इन्होंने? They have talked about polity, economy, and culture. ठीक है? What was their attitude towards India? Did they have a favorable attitude towards Indians? Yes. So they viewed Indians favorably. Were impressed by Indian wealth, courage of Indians in warfare, and the Indian sense of cleanliness. Yes, these are the kinds of things that they. Al-Biruni, on the other hand, came to India not as a trader, but as a scholar, as a pure scholar. और बाकी सब किसके इन्फ्लुएंस के अंदर आए थे? अरब्स के इन्फ्लुएंस. Al-Biruni came under the influence of Turks, right? Now, in Afghanistan, the Turks had consolidated power and a new sultanate had emerged at Ghazni, right? Founder कौन था इसका? Mahmud of Ghazni. And Ghazni was an infamous leader. He attacked India 17 different times. अलग-अलग directions में invade करता था. कभी गुजरात में, कभी गंगा वैली, कभी पंजाब तक इसके influence limited थे. On one of his invasions to India, he brought along with him his court scholar, Al-Biruni. But after arriving in India proper, the invader went on his way and Al-Biruni went on his own way. Right? Al-Biruni went towards Banaras, where he stayed for 2 years, learned about India, and then started writing about. So he came with Mahmud of Ghazni in the early 11th century. Traveled to Banaras, learned Sanskrit, and wrote the Kitabul Hind or Tarikh-e-Hind in Persian. Okay? He wrote the Kitabul Hind on the basis of his reading of ancient Indian Sanskrit works as well as his conversations with the scholars living at Banaras. Clear? So, subject matters क्या cover किए हैं इसने? He has talked about Indian society, religion, caste and varna, status of women. He has talked about Indian technology. He has talked about the status of Indian education, etc. What is the nature of his assessment? It is of a critical nature. Some things he has appreciated, other things he has condemned. Okay? The analysis or the assessment is of an analytical nature. Right? He has tried to scientifically break down the problems in the Indian society, Indian religion, Indian learning, etc., and has suggested solutions for them as well. He did not display the same kind of hostility that was evident from the from the other political actors of his period, such as Mahmud of Ghazni. Mahmud of Ghazni called himself Butch Chicken, that is the destroyer of idols. He took pride in breaking the temples or idols. Al-Biruni, on the other hand, displayed a great degree of admiration for the ancient Indian culture. He wanted Indians to learn from the other cultures and blamed their insularity for their defeat, for their weakness, for their stagnation, for their backwardness. Right? So he wanted, in fact, that the other cultures should also learn the good things from Indian civilization. He wanted an open exchange with the two. अब इनके बारे में, राइटर्स के बारे में वी आर गोइंग टू लर्न इन ग्रेटर डिटेल. यहाँ पे केवल एक ओवरव्यू देना था, तो दैट आई हैव गिवन. ठीक है. तो ग्रीक, रोमन, चाइनीज एंड अरब ट्रैवल्स. वंस अगेन, critical evaluation of foreign accounts. Once again, weaknesses and strengths. सबसे पहले strengths क्या है? But they help fill the gaps in Indian literature. कई सारे ऐसे periods हैं जहाँ पे Indian literature exist नहीं करता है, only foreign literature exists. Secondly, और बताइए, they give a unique perspective into Indian history. Why is this? Every culture has its own lens to perceive its surroundings. They consider different things to be important. It is not necessary what the Indian scholars felt was important to record would be the same as the Greek or the Chinese or the Arab scholars. So the unique perspective sheds light on new aspects of Indian literature that may have been ignored by Indian scholars on Indian history. Thirdly, they give details of important events, places, and persons. It's important for recreating the Indian past. For example, the invasion of Alexander, the battles of the Indus and the Hydaspes, the excursion of Nearchus up to the mouth of the river Indus and beyond, etc. So ये सारी चीजें कवर करते हैं. Then और क्या स्ट्रेंथ है इसका? They bring the tools of Western historiography to the Indian context, right? And Western historiography में focus किसके ऊपर होता है? Historical accuracy, historical exclusivity, and on chronology and authorship. ठीक है? So they help to frame the Indian history into a proper chronological context. For example, there are several uncertainties in Indian history. However, for example, कि चंद्रगुप्त मौर्य ने अपना एम्पायर कब एस्टैब्लिश किया? When did the Mauryan period begin? रेफरेंस पॉइंट के लिए क्या सर्व करता है? The invasion of Alexander. So 3 years after that, the Mauryan Empire was created. So they help establish Indian chronology in areas of uncertainty. Areas of uncertainty. Okay? Further, unlike Indian scholars who are writing on specific subjects, right? तो हर स्कॉलर का अपना एक फील्ड ऑफ स्टडी होगा. ये जो फॉरेन स्कॉलर्स हैं, आर दे आल्सो गोइंग टू राइट अबाउट द सेम सब्जेक्ट, एक सिंगुलर सब्जेक्ट? नो, दे आर गोइंग टू गिव अ broader perspective. They are going to have a bird's eye view of the Indian context. So they have a broad perspective which is useful in creating a comprehensive image of the past. Right? For example, Megasthenes talks about religion, he talks about society, he talks about polity, he talks about economy, he talks about foreign relations, he talks about warfare also, he talks about the customs of Indians, their various festivals, he talks about the presence of different trade routes, different classes of merchants, right? तो इस सब के बारे में बात कर रहा है. So he is giving a broad overview of Indian society. Indian works में या फिर किसी भी लिटरेचर के नेटिव वर्क्स में ये एलिमेंट थोड़ा मिसिंग है. व्हाट एल्स? और क्या स्ट्रेंथ है फॉरेन लिटरेचर का? नाउ सिंस फॉरेन ट्रैवलर्स आर न्यूट्रल ऑब्जर्वर्स, biases are not going to be as big a factor in their writings as Indian writings. Right? So they are relatively more objective and less biased. फर्दर इन राइटर्स का टारगेट ऑडियंस कौन होगा? इंडियन ऑडियंस या फिर देयर नेटिव ऑडियंस? Their native audience, their foreign audience, right? And therefore, a major way in which a major focus of their writings would be to highlight the different ways in which contact has been established between the Western or other civilizations and the Indians. So they shed greater light on cultural contacts. And comparisons. ठीक है? So these are some of the strengths. Weaknesses क्या है? फॉरेन लिटरेचर के देखो, जैसे अभी हमने डिस्कस किया दैट एवरी कल्चर हैज इट्स ओन लेंस ऑफ हाउ टू परसीव रियलिटी. नाउ दीज स्कॉलर्स वर दे born with the Indian lens? No, they inherently came with their own cultural lenses. Megasthenes came with the Greek lens, and he tried to analyze and perceive Indian society, Indian culture, Indian polity through his lens, right? This is going to result in certain inacts, certain laws. For example, he looked at Indian society. Indian society of his period was divided on the basis of varna and caste. लेकिन उसने क्या बोला? Indian society consists of 7 different classes. Why? Because caste concept did not exist in Greece. वहां पे society classes में divided था, तो उसने वही वाला जो division है इंडिया में superimpose कर दिया. And this is a result of the inherent biases of these scholars having their own cultural needs. Okay, write down biases associated with cultural dissimilarities and perceptions. ठीक है. Now, these travelers, आप अगर पुराना एनसीईआरटी पढ़ते हो तो आई डोंट रिमेम्बर कि किस क्लास के एनसीईआरटी में था ये, बट इनका एक डिस्क्रिप्शन दिया गया है दैट the way in which they perceive history is the same as the way in which you would perceive the outside world. You are traveling in a high speed train and looking outside the window. तो आपको बहुत छोटे पीरियड में एक बहुत बड़ा एरिया को कवर करना, ठीक है? तो यू आर गोइंग टू बी फोर्स्ड टू मेक जनरलाइजेशंस. डिटेल्स के ऊपर आप बहुत ज्यादा फोकस नहीं कर पाओगे, ठीक है? And that is what happens with these foreign travelers. So the practical limitations of covering a complex and large society in short periods leads to generalizations. Now, who were these travelers? They were either prominent traders or prominent scholars or ambassadors. Which strata of the society do you would come in contact with on a daily basis? Common people or elites? Elites. So in the writings, the picture that they have about India is going to be based on those elite sensibilities. So they had little practical contact with the common people. ठीक है, leading to historical distortions, leading to historical distortions. Now, एक प्रॉब्लम और होता है इसमें, that since their target audience is a foreign one, and for them India is a distant, almost mythical land. इसके बारे में कई सारे fables हैं. तो अगर आप बहुत ordinary language में इंडिया के बारे में लिखते हो, in a very factual manner लिखते हो, in a very dry language लिखते हो, then you will not be able to draw the attention of the readers back home, right? So in order to appease the target audience, जानबूझ करके ये exaggerations कर देते, कुछ embellishments डाल देते. For example, Megasthenes talks about certain tribes of Indians जिनके सर पे सींग होते हैं और पैरों पे खुर होते हैं. ऐसा कहीं exist होता है? नहीं. But he talks about these. Problem is that चलो मान लो ये तो हम easily identify कर सकते हैं कि यहाँ पे झूठ बोल रहा है. But if he was lying about this, what else was he lying about? That becomes difficult to assert. So they are sensationalized accounts consisting of several exaggerations and embellishments. Several exaggerations and embellishments. Okay. Then now language barrier भी. किस तरह का language barrier? Although Al-Biruni became an expert in Sanskrit, and I'm sure that Megasthenes would have also learned the common language, either Sanskrit or Prakrit, but they had to write their works not in the native Indian languages, but in their own native tongues. And several concepts or institutions are difficult to capture in foreign tongues. क्योंकि जो भी languages होती हैं, they develop in their own environment. They in response to their own social, economic and political context. तो जो नॉन नेटिव लैंग्वेजेस होती हैं वो इस कॉन्टेक्स्ट को कैप्चर करने में कई बार इनकेपेबल होती हैं. दे आर नॉट इक्विप्ड फॉर इट. सेवरल थिंग्स आर लॉस्ट इन ट्रांसलेशन. देन वंस अगेन क्या होता है, आई विटनेस अकाउंट्स हैं इन फॉरेन ट्रैवलर्स के, दे have to be interpreted by modern translators. There is one degree of separation between us and them, and then they have to be interpreted by modern historians. So another layer of separation, right? And in दो prism से गुजरने के बाद there is almost a certainty that जो वो author actually बोलना चाह रहा था वो हमको अब सुनाई नहीं दे रहा. ठीक है. So problems with with translation and interpretation. Okay. So these are the strengths and weaknesses of foreigners accounts. Take down one question. Discuss the relative significance of foreigners' travelogues in recreating ancient Indian history. Recreating ancient Indian history. It's wrong. 200 words, 15 marks. वही critical evaluation करना है. हो जाएगा. Of course, you'll have to supplement your arguments with certain examples. कुछ examples मैंने यहाँ पे mention किए हैं, and some other examples you will get to know as we come across these sources once again later on. For example, modern period में हम Megasthenes को revisit करेंगे, early medieval age में Al-Biruni को revisit करेंगे, गुप्ता पीरियड में फाहिन को, हर्षवर्धन में हुएनसांग को revisit करेंगे. तो वहाँ पे कुछ और problems and strengths आपको यहाँ पे मिलेंगी, and then you can enrich your answer over here. ठीक है, फ्रेमवर्क अभी बना लीजिए, एंड एज मेनी गुड एग्जाम्पल्स एज यू कैन कलेक्ट ना, स्टार्ट डूइंग दैट फ्रॉम नाउ. क्लियर है? तो आई एम एंडिंग दिस लेक्चर नाउ. हमारा पहले यूनिट में नाउ देयर आर अ कपल ऑफ थिंग्स रिमेनिंग, दैट इज द historiography of ancient India and the question whether Indians had a sense of history or not. Okay, so this we are going to address in tomorrow's lecture. So if there are any doubts, please let me know, otherwise I shall end this session. No doubt? All right then. Thank you for your time.